Nearing the end of the 1990s, the people on Martha's Vineyard Island had continuous recessive deafness for more than 2.5 centuries. What is recessive deafness, you might ask? It's when a person is a carrier of the recessive gene or non-dominant gene that produces hearing loss. This means even if you're not deaf, you still may be a carrier of the recessive gene. This gene is called connexin 26. There are 3 different levels of deafness. Conductive hearing loss, which is when sound does not reach the inner ear due to blockage. Sensory neural hearing loss, which affects 90% of the population and is caused by loud music, noise in the workplace, and it cannot be cured because the nerve is damaged. Mixed is when both conductive and sensory neural hearing loss affect the individual. Within this gamma of deafness, there are 70 different types of deafness. The number of females born deaf was equal to the number of males born deaf on the island. There was a high occurrence of children being born deaf from hearing parents at almost an 80% rate. This genetic mutation continued throughout the population, affecting it in such a way that the neural and anatomical development did not occur. So my next topic is the origin. The origin of this unusual occurrence began back between 1642 and 1710 with the first settlers that came to the island. The descendants are able to be traced within a 10-mile radius. The first case of deafness was recorded on April 5th, 1714. The captain of a ship heading towards the island from Boston made mention that there was an Englishman on board that had remained very quiet throughout the trip. The captain thought that was kind of rude. Later, the captain came to find out that this man was deaf. His name was Jonathan Lambert. He married Elizabeth Eddy, and together they had 7 children. Of which 2 were deaf. He was born at Barnstable, Cape Cod, on April 28, 1657. He settled his family in Tisbury. The gene pool was limited in a way because marriages did not take place from people far away from the island, but from towns close by. People seldom left the town on a further distance than a foot or a horse could travel, which was approximately 10 miles. The language adaptation. The way that the community adjusted to the language was astounding. Since the pattern of deafness continued on the island, the need for a sign language grew. Hearing parents became aware and learned sign language. When a hearing family had a child that was deaf, this was seen as a minor concern, not a major misfortune. Because parents knew the language, and the majority of the population knew sign language too. The inability to hear was widely accepted at Martha's Vineyard by the community and did not affect a person's status at all. By the end of the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century, Martha's Vineyard Island was bilingual, English and sign language. Children grew up with deaf members in their household, so they learned sign language as normally as learning English. It came naturally, some people from the island stated. Members from the community carried on in conversation using sign language, then switched to English, and then back to sign. Going back and forth in the two languages came naturally to them. It was instinct. In the household, children learn sign language much sooner than they learn to speak. This was actually researched and confirmed. Sign language was acquired several months sooner in a child's development than English. It was seen that the acquisition of sign language and English in the early years as a child helped build a vocabulary nearing 1,000 words by the age of 5, rather than learning separately in which they would acquire a couple dozen words. The acquisition of sign language was not just learned at home, but in social areas, like at the store, going with parents to do chores, at the restaurants. Both deaf and hearing families introduced their children to sign language. There really was no formal education for signing. That's why the island developed the vineyard language. Largely influenced by ASL. Because some signs were different from ASL, it became occasionally hard to understand the signing of news interpreters on TV. Education. Were there public schools on the island? Well, yes. Martha's Vineyard was not financially favored. In some instances, children, both deaf and hearing, needed to drop out of school by 5th grade in order to help out the family business by working the land and helping to provide for their homes. 9 out of 10 deaf children were sent to the American Asylum for the Deaf in Hartford, Connecticut. In 1817, the largest group of students at Hartford was primarily from Martha's Vineyard. Another 30 to 75% of deaf children never went to school. Careers. At Martha's Vineyard, the economy was mainly based on fishing and farming. Families were all involved in providing for the home, whether young or adult. An extra pair of hands always helped. Adult males over 15 years of age were allowed to work in navigation. Some were involved in manufacturing and trade occupations on the island. Some of the families owned their land and would have dairy or milk farms. They sold milk, cream, or cheese to the nearby neighbors and made their income from that. The whaling industry was also well known on the island and was highly competitive. Farming and working the land was the most famous way of income for the people of Martha's Vineyard. Other odd jobs that provided income for the people of the island were carpentry, selling and chopping wood, and building ships. Finished.